The wrench hit the wall 6 inches from my head. Not close enough to actually strike me, but close enough that I felt the displacement of air, heard the metallic clang that would echo in my nightmares for weeks. My father stood there, face red with rage, finger pointed at my chest like a loaded weapon. "Either you get out," he snarled, spittle flying from his lips, "or you learn your goddamn place in this shop." Behind him, my mother smirked, arms crossed, while my sister Brenda and her boyfriend Chad snickered like hyenas witnessing a kill. That was the moment I decided I was done. Done being the family's punching bag, done sacrificing everything for people who saw me as less than nothing, done pretending that blood meant anything when it came with so much poison. But before I tell you how I walked out of that grimy shop and built an empire that would eventually put them on their knees, let me ask you something. Have you ever loved people who treated you like trash? Have you ever given everything to a family that gave you nothing back? If this story resonates with you, hit that like button, subscribe to hear more stories of people who refuse to stay victims, and drop a comment telling me about a time you finally stood up for yourself. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't just my story. It's the story of everyone who's ever been underestimated, overlooked, and undervalued. Now let me take you back to the beginning, to the day I realized that the people who were supposed to love me most were actually the ones destroying me piece by piece. I was 11 years old the first time I understood that something was fundamentally wrong with my family. It was a Saturday morning in October, and my father had brought home a rusted lawnmower engine that someone had thrown away. Most kids my age were watching cartoons or playing video games. I was crouched on the garage floor, completely mesmerized, as my father disassembled the engine, explaining each part with a patience he never showed me any other time. For 3 hours that morning, I wasn't the disappointment. I wasn't the wrong kind of child. I was just a kid learning something fascinating, and my father was teaching me without judgment, without comparison to Brenda, without that look of disdain he usually wore when he looked at me. When we got the engine running again, the sound was like music. My father actually smiled at me, actually ruffled my hair. "You've got good hands, Riley," he said. "Natural talent." I held on to those words for years. They were the only compliment he ever gave me, and I replayed them in my mind during every other moment when he made it clear I was a burden. When he forgot my birthday, but threw an elaborate party for Brenda. When he missed my school performances, but never missed one of Brenda's cheerleading competitions. When he looked at me with something close to confusion, as if he couldn't quite understand how I'd ended up in his house. The Thorne family business, Thorne Metalworks, had been passed down through 3 generations. My great-grandfather had started it in 1952, a small shop that did custom fabrication for local businesses. My grandfather expanded it into industrial manufacturing. By the time my father inherited it, the place occupied an entire warehouse in Pittsburgh's industrial district, employed 23 people, and had contracts with companies across 3 states. But my father wasn't the businessman his father had been. He was coasting on reputation, on legacy contracts, on the quality of work that other people did, while he took credit. The shop was outdated, equipment was old, and the workers who really knew what they were doing were slowly leaving for better opportunities. But my father couldn't see it, or wouldn't see it. He walked through that shop like a king surveying his kingdom, blind to the rust eating away at the foundation. My mother, Patricia Thorne, had married into the business and immediately set about managing the finances. She had a degree in accounting and a personality that could freeze boiling water. I never saw her laugh, not genuinely. I never saw her show affection to anyone, not even Brenda, though she certainly favored her. My mother's love language was control, and she controlled everything she could reach, except the one thing that mattered most: the fact that the business was slowly dying. Brenda was 4 years older than me, blonde and conventionally pretty, in a way I never was. She learned early that tears and tantrums got her everything she wanted. When she was 16 and wrecked her car drunk driving, my parents bought her a new one and blamed the incident on the other driver. When she flunked out of community college twice, they paid for a 3rd try and told everyone she was taking time to find herself. When she maxed out 3 credit cards shopping online, they paid off the debt and increased her allowance. I learned a different lesson. I learned that asking for things got me nothing, that crying made me weak, that the only way to earn even a scrap of approval was to be useful. So I made myself useful. At 12, I was cleaning the shop after hours. At 13, I was sorting parts and organizing inventory. At 14, I started teaching myself real mechanical work, staying late after my father and the workers had gone home, using YouTube videos and library books to figure out what went where and why. The shop had this ancient lathe from the 1960s that kept breaking down. None of the regular workers could figure out what was wrong with it. One night after everyone had left, I spent 6 hours taking it apart piece by piece, cleaning decades of built-up grime, replacing a worn bearing with one I scavenged from another broken machine, and reassembling it. When my father came in the next morning and found it working perfectly, he assumed one of the senior mechanics had fixed it. When I told him I'd done it, he looked at me like I was lying. He actually called in Frank, the head machinist, to ask if he'd worked on it. Frank, to his credit, told the truth, but my father just grunted and walked away. No thank you, no acknowledgement, nothing. That was the pattern. I could do the work, but I couldn't get the recognition. And Brenda, who couldn't tell a wrench from a hammer, got praised for simply showing up. The dynamic got worse when I started high school. Brenda had graduated 2 years earlier and was supposedly working at the shop doing administrative tasks, which mostly meant showing up late, leaving early, and spending most of her time on social media. She made $30,000 a year for this. I worked 30 hours a week on top of school, doing actual skilled labor, and made minimum wage. When I pointed this out to my mother, she looked at me over her reading glasses with that expression that made me feel small. Brenda has expenses. She's an adult. You're still in school. You should be grateful we let you work here at all. Let me work there. As if I wasn't making myself indispensable. As if I hadn't personally kept half the equipment running. Then Chad Morrison entered our lives, and everything got exponentially worse. Chad was 26, the son of Robert Morrison, who owned Morrison Metalworks, a competing shop on the other side of Pittsburgh. The Morrisons had more money than the Thorns' newer equipment, bigger contracts. Chad had grown up with every advantage, gone to a decent college on his father's dime, and graduated with a business degree he'd probably cheated his way through. He was handsome in a generic way, tall and broad-shouldered with perfect teeth and hair that looked like he paid someone to maintain it. Brenda met him at some industry mixer my parents had dragged her to. Within 2 weeks, they were inseparable. Within 2 months, my parents were treating him like the son they'd never had. The first time Chad came to our shop, I was in the middle of fabricating a custom bracket for a client working with a precision that required complete focus. I had my welding mask on, didn't hear him come up behind me. When I pulled the mask up to check my work, he was standing there with my father, and they were both staring at me like I was an exotic animal in a zoo. "This is Riley," my father said, and his tone was apologetic. Actually apologetic. "My younger daughter, she helps out around here sometimes. Helps out sometimes." I worked more hours than any employee except Frank. Chad extended his hand, and when I shook it, I noticed his palm was soft. No calluses, no scars. He'd never done a day of real work in his life. "Nice to meet you," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's cute that your dad lets you play around in here." Play around? I was 17 years old and could outwork most of the adult men in that shop. But I smiled politely because that's what I'd learned to do. Smile and nod and keep my head down. Chad became a fixture. He was always around, always offering his opinion on things. He didn't understand, always positioning himself as an expert. My father ate it up. Here was someone who spoke the language of business, who talked about market positioning and strategic partnerships and operational efficiency. Never mind that the shop's operations were running fine until Chad started suggesting changes. Never mind that his ideas usually made things worse. 2 months after Chad and Brenda started dating, I overheard a conversation that should have been my wake-up call. I was in the storage room taking inventory, and they didn't know I was there. Chad and my father were in the office that shared a wall with the storage room, and the ventilation duct carried their voices perfectly. "The problem with this place," Chad was saying, "is that you're too soft. You've got dead weight on the payroll equipment that should have been scrapped years ago, and you're not charging enough for your work." "I've been trying to modernize," my father said, defensive. "But every time I propose changes, the old-timers push back." "Then fire the old-timers. Bring in younger guys who'll do what they're told. And Marcus, I gotta be honest with you, you're letting family dynamics interfere with business decisions." There was a pause. "What do you mean?" "Riley," Chad said, and my stomach clenched. "I know she's your daughter, but she's taking up space that could go to a real worker. She's playing mechanic, and I get that it's nice she has a hobby, but this is a business. You need people who can actually produce, not kids pretending they know what they're doing." I waited for my father to defend me, to tell Chad that I was one of his best workers, that I'd saved him thousands in repair costs, that I could diagnose problems the senior mechanics missed. Instead, he sighed. "You're probably right. Patricia has been saying the same thing, but I don't know what to do with her. If I cut her hours, she'll make a scene. And she does actually get some work done, even if it's not professional quality. Not professional quality. I just completed a custom job that the client had praised as the best work they'd ever seen from us. Leave it to me, Chad said. I'll make it uncomfortable enough that she'll quit on her own. Better that way. Less drama. That was the moment. I should have quit. Should have walked out and never looked back. But I was 17, still living at home, still believing that if I just worked harder, proved myself more thoroughly, they'd eventually see my worth. So I stayed. And Chad made good on his promise to make my life hell. Chad's campaign started small. My tools would vanish, then reappear in random places. Looking for these, he'd ask innocently, holding up my wrenches. Found them in the break room. You really need to be more organized, Riley. He'd criticize my work in front of clients. See this weld a little rough, don't you think? We'll fix it before delivery. The weld was perfect, and he knew it. Then it escalated. He'd hand me specifications for a job, watch me complete it, then pull out different measurements. These aren't what I gave you, he'd say, showing my father the correct specs, while I held the wrong ones he'd handed me. I don't know what she's thinking. One afternoon, I caught him presenting my custom bracket design to a client as his own concept. When I opened my mouth to object, he shot me a look that said, "Try it." The worst were his comments when no one else could hear. You know, Riley, you'd be pretty if you tried. But who am I kidding? No guy's gonna want to date a girl who looks and smells like a garage. He'd laugh, eyes cold. Maybe that's why you're always here. Got nowhere else to be, right? I could have reported him, but to whom my father worshipped him. My mother had made me an inconvenience. Brenda would defend him against God himself. The breaking point started building the summer I turned 18. My father landed a contract with Allegheny Manufacturing, a regional company that needed custom conveyor components for a new production line. It was a 6-figure contract, the biggest deal Thorne Metalworks had seen in 5 years. It was also incredibly complex, requiring precision fabrication and careful adherence to specifications. My father assigned the project to Frank and 2 other senior workers, but within 2 weeks, it was clear they were in over their heads. The components required tolerances tighter than anything we'd done before, and our old equipment couldn't handle it without constant adjustment. Parts were coming out wrong, deadlines were slipping, and Frank looked like he was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. I'd been watching this project from the sidelines, and I could see exactly what was going wrong. The CAD drawings my father was working from were good, but they didn't account for the quirks of our specific equipment. The metal we were using had a different coefficient of thermal expansion than what the drawing specified. The drill press was pulling slightly to the left, throwing off hole placements by millimeters that compounded into major problems. One night, after everyone had gone home, I stayed late and pulled up the CAD files on the computer. I spent 4 hours redoing the drawings, adjusting for our equipment's limitations, recalculating measurements to account for material properties. Then I printed out the new versions and left them on Frank's desk with a note explaining the changes. The next morning, Frank came to find me. He was a man in his 50s, had been working with metal since before I was born, and he looked at me with something I'd rarely seen directed my way: respect. These adjustments, he said, holding up my drawings, they're exactly what we needed. How did you figure this out? I shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. I've been watching. The problem seemed obvious. Obvious, he repeated with a slight smile. Kid, half the engineers I've worked with couldn't have caught this. You've got a real gift. For the next 3 months, I became the shadow worker on the Allegheny project. Officially, I was just helping out. Unofficially, I was solving every problem that arose. When a batch of parts came out warped, I figured out that the heat treatment process needed to be modified. When the client requested design changes, I reworked the CAD models. When assembly issues cropped up, I developed jigs and fixtures to make the work easier and more precise. I worked 16-hour days. I came in before everyone else and left after everyone had gone. I missed my high school graduation because we had a critical deadline. I spent my 18th birthday in that shop, covered in cutting oil, making sure every component was perfect. And through it all, Chad was there watching, criticizing, taking notes on everything I did. But he was also there taking credit. Every time my father checked on the project's progress, Chad was the one giving updates. Every time there was a breakthrough, Chad was the one explaining the solution. He had a talent for being present at the right moments and absent when the hard work was happening. Brenda was there too, playing the supportive girlfriend, bringing Chad lunch, posting photos on social media about her amazing boyfriend who was doing such important work. In the photos, you could sometimes see me in the background, a blur of motion, unidentified and unimportant. The project was completed 2 weeks ahead of schedule. The client was thrilled. They sent a letter praising the exceptional quality, noting that the work exceeded their expectations. They specifically mentioned the innovative design solutions and precise fabrication. My father called a meeting for a Friday evening after the shop closed. He ordered pizza-bought beer for the workers, set up tables in the largest bay of the shop. It felt like a celebration, and I let myself hope just for a moment that maybe this was when things would change. Maybe this was when my father would finally see me. Everyone gathered around as my father stood up to make a speech. He talked about the importance of the Allegheny contract, about how it represented the future of Thorn Metalworks, about how teamwork and dedication had made it possible. He thanked Frank and the senior workers for their craftsmanship. He thanked my mother for managing the financial side of the contract. He thanked Brenda for her administrative support. Then he turned to Chad. But the real star of this project was Chad Morrison. His technical expertise, his problem-solving abilities, and his leadership were invaluable. Chad, I can't thank you enough for your contribution. You've proven yourself to be an essential part of this company's future. He handed Chad a check, $5,000, a bonus for his invaluable contribution. Chad accepted it with false modesty, giving a speech about teamwork and how proud he was to be part of the Thorn family. People applauded. Brenda kissed him. My mother beamed. I sat there at the edge of the gathering pizza, growing cold on my paper plate, and felt something inside me break. Not snap dramatically, but crumble slowly like metal succumbing to stress fatigue. 3 months of my life. 3 months of sacrificing sleep school, any semblance of a normal teenage existence. And I didn't even merit a mention. Frank caught my eye from across the room. He looked uncomfortable, like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. No one did. And I realized that even the people who knew the truth, who'd seen me work, who'd benefited from my solutions, they weren't going to speak up. It was easier to go along with the narrative, to let Chad take the credit to keep the boss happy. I left before the celebration ended, walking home through the dark streets of our neighborhood. We lived close enough to the shop that I could walk, a fact I'd always appreciated, because it meant I could escape there whenever home became unbearable. But that night, walking between those two places that both rejected me, I felt truly homeless. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the past 3 months, every problem I'd solved, every late night, every sacrifice, and for what? For nothing. For less than nothing, because they'd taken my work and given someone else the glory. By morning, I'd made a decision. I was going to confront my father. I was going to demand recognition, demand fair payment, demand to be seen. I'd been quiet for too long, and quiet had gotten me nowhere. I found him in the shop office on Monday morning, going over paperwork with my mother. I knocked on the doorframe, and when they looked up, I saw the irritation on both their faces. I was interrupting something important. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I need to talk to you about the Allegheny contract." He sighed. "Riley, I'm busy. If this is about work schedules..." "It's about my work on the project, my contributions." My mother's expression hardened. "Riley, this is not the time." "Then when is the time?" I stepped into the office, closing the door behind me. "When is the time to acknowledge that I did most of the work on that project? That I'm the one who solved the design problems, adjusted the specifications, figured out the fabrication issues?" My father's face flushed. "You helped. No one's denying that you helped. But you're 18 years old. You don't have formal training. You can't expect the same recognition as experienced professionals. Chad has less experience than I do. He has a business degree and a rich father. He doesn't know anything about actual fabrication. Chad has expertise in areas you don't understand," my mother interjected. "Project management, client relations, strategic planning." "Strategic planning." I couldn't help the bitter laugh. He showed up 4 times in 3 months, each time to criticize work he didn't understand and suggest changes that would have made things worse. Frank can confirm this. Any of the workers can confirm this. My father stood up, and his size was suddenly intimidating in the small office. "Are you calling me a liar? Are you saying I don't know what happened in my own shop? I'm saying you weren't there. You were here in this office while the actual work happened. You don't know what happened because you didn't see it." "I saw the results," he snapped. "I saw a successful project completed under Chad's guidance." "Under my work," I corrected. "Ask Frank. Ask him who redesigned the CAD drawings. Ask him who figured out the heat treatment issue. Ask him who came up with the assembly fixtures." My father's jaw clenched. "Frank works for me. He'll say whatever I tell him to say." The casual cruelty of that statement stole my breath. He knew. On some level, he knew I was telling the truth, and he didn't care. The narrative was more important than the truth. Chad was more important than I was. I want to be paid fairly, Al, I said, trying a different approach. If my work is valuable, I should be compensated for it. Chad got $5,000. I got my regular minimum wage paycheck. That's not right. My mother actually laughed. Riley, sweetie, you're missing the point. Chad got that bonus because he's an investment in our future. He's going to marry Brenda. He's going to be part of this family, part of this business. That money is an investment in our long-term success. And I'm your daughter. I've been working here for years. I'm the one who actually knows how to do the work. You're a girl, my father said, and his tone was final. You're going to get married, have kids, move away. We're not going to invest in someone who's just going to leave. Chad is our future. You're temporary. The words hung in the air between us. Temporary. After everything I'd done, everything I'd sacrificed, I was temporary. So nothing I do matters, I said quietly. No amount of work, no level of skill, no contribution I make will ever be enough because I was born the wrong gender. That's not what I said, my father began, but my mother cut him off. Actually, that's exactly what we're saying. This is a family business, Riley. Family. And in this family, the sons carry on the legacy. Since we don't have a son, Chad is the next best thing. You need to accept your role and stop causing problems. I looked between them, these two people who'd brought me into the world, and I saw them clearly for the first time. There was no love there. There never had been. There was obligation, resentment, and a fundamental belief that I was worth less because of something I couldn't control. My role, I repeated. You want me to accept my role as the family workhorse, work for minimum wage, get no recognition, watch other people take credit for my contributions, and be grateful for the opportunity. Grateful would be nice, my mother said dryly, but we'll settle for obedient and quiet. That's when I should have walked out. Right then in that moment. But I was still clinging to this desperate hope that I could change their minds. That I could prove myself so thoroughly they'd have to acknowledge me. Let me take on my own projects, I said. Give me a chance to show what I can do independently. If I succeed, I get full credit. If I fail, I'll accept that I'm not ready. My father considered this, then shook his head. Too risky. If you screw up, it reflects on the company, on me. But if Chad screws up, Chad won't screw up because he'll have support and resources. You want to prove yourself? Fine. Do it without our resources. Show me you can succeed without my shop, my equipment, my reputation backing you. Then maybe we'll talk. It was a trap, and I knew it. He was essentially telling me to prove I could run a metalworking business without any of the tools necessary to run a metalworking business. It was impossible, and he knew it. But I was 18 and desperate and stupid. Okay, I said. I'll do it. My mother actually smiled. Oh, honey, this is going to be a valuable lesson for you. The real world isn't kind to people with inflated egos. I left the office feeling like I'd been hollowed out. I went back to work because I didn't know what else to do. I finished out the day cleaning and organizing the mindless work, giving my hands something to do while my brain spun in circles. Chad found me near closing time. The shop was mostly empty, just a few workers finishing up. He leaned against the workbench where I was organizing tools, that ever-present smirk on his face. Heard you had a little tantrum in the office today, he said. I didn't respond, didn't even look at him. You know what your problem is, Riley. You don't understand your place. You think because you can turn a wrench, you're valuable. But any high school dropout can turn a wrench. What makes someone valuable is connections, presentation, knowing how to play the game. I kept organizing, putting each tool in its designated spot, focusing on the simple orderliness of it. You're never going to be successful in this industry, he continued. You know why? Because even if you're good at the technical stuff, which I'm not convinced you are, nobody's going to take you seriously. A woman running a metalworking shop? That's a joke. Clients want to work with men. They want to shake hands with someone they respect, and they're never going to respect you. I turned to face him then. Are you done? He straightened, surprised I'd spoken. Just trying to help you see reality, save you some wasted effort. I don't need your help. I don't need anything from you. That's where you're wrong, he said, and his smile widened. You need me more than you know. I'm the only thing standing between your father and his complete disregard for you. I've actually been defending you, telling him you're trying your best, that you shouldn't be punished for being born without the necessary equipment. He gestured vaguely at his crotch, making his meaning clear. I've been telling him to let you stay on, give you easy work, let you play mechanic as long as you want. Because I'm a nice guy, but that can change. One word from me and you're out on your ass with nothing, so maybe show a little gratitude. I set down the wrench I was holding very carefully because if I didn't, I was going to throw it at him. Get away from me. Or what? He stepped closer, invading my space. You gonna tell on me? Tell Daddy that Chad's being mean. He'll just tell you to toughen up. Or maybe you'll cry about it, prove you're too emotional to work here. That's when Brenda appeared, walking into the shop with her purse over her shoulder, ready to pick up Chad. She saw us standing close together, and her expression immediately soured. What's going on here? She demanded. Nothing, Chad said smoothly, stepping back. Just giving Riley some career advice. Brenda looked between us suspiciously. Riley, what did you do? I didn't. She's been complaining again, Chad interjected. About the Allegheny project, trying to take credit for my work. Brenda's suspicion immediately transformed into anger. Are you serious? You're so jealous of Chad that you're trying to steal his accomplishments. That's pathetic, Riley. Even for you. I'm not stealing anything, I'm just stating facts. Facts? Brenda's voice rose. The fact is that you're a bitter, jealous little girl who can't stand to see other people succeed. Chad has been nothing but nice to you, and this is how you repay him. Nice. I couldn't help the harsh laugh. Brenda, he's been sabotaging me for months. He moves my tools, gives me wrong specifications, takes credit for my work. Oh my God, listen to yourself. Brenda threw her hands up. Everything is someone else's fault with you. Maybe if you focused on actually working instead of making excuses, you wouldn't have these problems. I work more than anyone here. I work more than you've worked in your entire life. Brenda's face went red. I work hard. I do important administrative tasks that you're too stupid to understand. You show up late and leave early. You spend most of your time on your phone. The only important thing you do is cash your paycheck. That's when Brenda slapped me. Not hard enough to really hurt, but hard enough to shock both of us. For a moment, we both just stared at each other, equally surprised. Then she started crying. You made me do that. You're so awful, you make people act out of character. Chad immediately went to comfort her, shooting me a look of pure malice over her shoulder. Come on, baby, let's get out of here. Your sister isn't worth your tears. They left Brenda sobbing dramatically, Chad murmuring soothing words. And I stood there in the empty shop, my cheeks stinging, realizing that I just lost even the pretense of family support. I went home that night expecting some kind of consequence for Brenda. Surely slapping someone at work, even in a family business, crossed some kind of line. Instead, I got a lecture from my mother about controlling my temper and not provoking my sister. I got a cold look from my father that said I disappointed him yet again. And I got a text from Brenda, stay away from my boyfriend or next time will be worse. That night, lying in my bed, I made a different kind of decision. I was done trying to prove myself to people who would never see me. Done hoping for recognition that would never come. Done being the family punching bag. But I couldn't just leave. I had no money saved, nowhere to go, no support system. I needed a plan. For the next 2 weeks, I kept my head down and worked. But I was also documenting everything. Every project I completed, every problem I solved, every hour I worked. I took photos of my work, saved copies of CAD files I created, kept detailed notes. I opened a secret bank account and started depositing every penny I could scrape together, even if it was just a few dollars here and there. I also started looking for opportunities. I spent my nights researching small business loans, equipment, financing used machinery dealers. I looked at cheap commercial spaces, ways to start small and scale up. I taught myself business management and accounting. I created a portfolio of my work. The day everything exploded started like any other. It was a Tuesday in late September, and the shop was busy. We had multiple projects running, deadlines looming, and everyone was on edge. I was working on a custom fabrication job, a one-off piece for a client who'd specifically requested me after seeing some of my previous work. The client was Michael Torres, an entrepreneur who was starting a boutique manufacturing company. He'd come to Thorn Metalworks because of our reputation, but he'd worked specifically with me on the design because he said I was the only one who understood what he needed. The project was small but technically challenging, exactly the kind of work I loved. I just completed the final assembly when Chad appeared. He looked at my work, picked it up, turned it over in his hands. This is garbage, he announced loudly enough that several workers looked over. The welds are uneven, the finish is rough, and I can see tolerance issues from here. I stared at him. The welds were perfect. The finish was exactly what the client had requested, and the tolerances were within microns of the specifications. Chad, that piece is ready for client pickup. It's exactly what Mr. Torres ordered. Yeah, well, Mr. Torres doesn't know quality when he sees it. I'm not letting this leave the shop. It'll make us look incompetent. He walked away with my piece, and I followed him to the office where my father was working. "Marcus," Chad said, "we've got a quality control problem." He set my work on the desk. "Riley's been rushing through this project and the results are unacceptable. We can't deliver this." My father examined the piece, frowning. The thing was, my father actually knew quality work when he saw it. He could tell Chad was exaggerating, but he looked between Chad and me, and I could see him making a calculation. "It could be better," he said finally. "It's perfect," I countered. "It matches the specifications exactly. Mr. Torres approved the design. He's expecting pickup today." "Then you'd better start over," Chad said with a smile. "You've got about 6 hours to redo it." "Redo it for what? There's nothing wrong with it." "Your attitude is what's wrong," my father snapped. "Chad is trying to maintain our quality standards, and you're fighting him every step of the way. Maybe if you spent less time arguing and more time working, your output would be acceptable." I looked at the piece I'd spent 40 hours creating. Perfect welds, precise measurements, exactly what had been requested. And they wanted me to start over because Chad decided to use it as a tool to humiliate me. "No," I said. My father's head snapped up. "What did you just say?" I said, "No, I'm not redoing work that's already perfect. If you have a legitimate technical concern, tell me what it is. But I'm not starting over because Chad wants to flex his imaginary authority." Chad's face darkened. "Imaginary authority? I'm the senior consultant on this project." "You're not a consultant. You're my sister's boyfriend who's been pretending to know things he doesn't." That's when Chad made his mistake. He grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks. "You need to learn some respect." I yanked my arm free. "Don't touch me." "Or what?" He stepped closer, using his size to intimidate. "What are you going to do, little girl?" I should have walked away. Should have been the bigger person. Instead, I looked him dead in the eye and said, "At least I can do actual work. All you can do is run your mouth and take credit for things other people accomplish. You're a parasite and everyone here knows it." His hand moved so fast I almost didn't see it. He shoved me, not hard enough to make me fall, but hard enough to make me stumble back. And that's when my father reacted. Not to Chad shoving me, to me provoking him. My father grabbed a wrench from his desk, the big adjustable one he kept there as a paperweight and threat. He hurled it at the wall next to my head, close enough that I felt the air move, close enough that the message was crystal clear. "Either you get out," he snarled, "or you learn your goddamn place in this shop." He grabbed my shoulder, spun me to face him. His face was inches from mine, red with rage, eyes wild. "You think you can talk to people like that? You think you can disrespect Chad, disrespect me in my own business?" Behind him, my mother had appeared, drawn by the commotion. Brenda and Chad stood together, watching with satisfaction. None of them moved to intervene. My father's grip on my shoulder tightened. "You raise your voice to me again, you show me that attitude one more time, and you're done. Not just here. I'll make sure no shop in this city will hire you. I'll destroy any chance you have of working in this industry. Do you understand me?" I looked into his eyes and saw only hatred. Not disappointment, not frustration. Pure hatred, like I was something contaminating his space. I grabbed his wrist and removed his hand from my shoulder. Then I turned to my workstation and started gathering my personal tools, the ones I'd bought myself. "What are you doing?" my mother demanded. "Leaving," I said simply. "You can't just leave," Brenda said. "We're in the middle of projects. You have responsibilities." I looked at her, this woman who shared my DNA, but nothing else. "My responsibility is to myself now. Good luck with the projects. Chad can handle them. He's such an expert after all." I walked past all of them carrying my toolbox, and not one of them tried to stop me. Not really. My father made a half-hearted comment about how I'd regret this, how I'd come crawling back. My mother said something about irresponsibility. Chad smirked. Brenda called me selfish. I walked out of Thorn Metalworks with $300 in savings, a toolbox of my own equipment, and absolutely no plan beyond getting as far away as possible. The first 3 hours were the worst. I walked aimlessly through the industrial district, my toolbox getting heavier with every step, my mind spinning with everything I'd lost. I had no job, no references I could actually use, no safety net. I had a high school diploma and skills that apparently no one valued. I called the one friend I had from school, Jenny, and asked if I could crash on her couch. She said her parents wouldn't allow it, but she could lend me $50 if I needed it. I told her I'd figure it out and hung up before I started crying. By evening, I found myself in a neighborhood I barely recognized, the kind of place where buildings leaned and businesses had bars on the windows. I was exhausted, hungry, and starting to face the reality that I might be spending the night on the street. That's when I saw Henderson's Mechanics. It was a small shop, maybe a quarter the size of Thorn Metalworks, wedged between a liquor store and a boarded-up restaurant. The sign was old, the paint faded, but the lights were on inside, and I could see someone moving around through the grimy window. I stood outside for a long time, watching an elderly man struggle with what looked like a transmission. He'd position it, try to mate it to an engine block, swear, when it wouldn't seat properly, try again. I could see the problem from 50 feet away. The bell housing was warped, causing the input shaft to bind. I don't know what made me go inside. Desperation, probably. Or maybe just the fundamental need to fix something when I could see exactly what was wrong. The bell chimed when I pushed open the door. The old man looked up startled, and I got my first good look at Henry Henderson. He was in his 70s, thin and wiry, with hands that bore decades of scars and joints that were probably arthritic. His face was weathered, his hair white, but his eyes were sharp. "We're closed," he said, but not unkindly. "Your bell housing is warped," I said, gesturing to the transmission. "The input shaft is binding on the clutch disc. You need to check the mounting face for straightness, and probably shim it before you try to mate it." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he set down his tools and walked over to where I stood. "Show me." I set down my toolbox and went to the transmission. "See here," I pointed to where the housing met the block. "There's a gap on this side. The housing isn't sitting flush. That's why the shaft is binding. You're forcing it, which is probably damaging the pilot bearing. And you know this how? I can see it, and I've done this kind of work before." Henry studied me, his expression unreadable. "You got somewhere to be tonight." The question caught me off guard. I could have lied, maintained my pride. Instead, I told the truth. "No." He nodded slowly, like that confirmed something. "Tell you what, you help me get this transmission sorted. I'll give you $20 and let you sleep in the back office. Got a cot there, space heater that works most of the time. Tomorrow, if you're still around, maybe we can talk about some more work." It was the best offer I'd gotten all day. Okay. We spent the next 2 hours working on that transmission. Henry had the knowledge, but his hands shook with age. His joints didn't bend the way they used to. I had young hands and eyes that could see the minute details he struggled with. Together, we got the transmission mated properly, the whole assembly bolted up and ready for installation. When we finished, Henry handed me a $20 bill and showed me to the back office. It was barely more than a closet filled with filing cabinets and parts catalogs, but there was indeed a cot and a space heater. After the day I'd had, it looked like luxury. "Bathrooms across the hall," Henry said. "Help yourself to coffee in the morning. There's a diner 2 blocks down that's cheap and decent." "Thank you," I said, and meant it more than I'd ever meant anything. He paused at the door. "What's your name?" Riley Thorne." Something flickered across his face. "Thorne? Any relation to Marcus Thorne runs that metalworks shop." I hesitated, then nodded. "He's my father." "Huh," Henry said, and I couldn't read his tone. "Interesting." He left and I heard the front door lock, heard his truck start up and drive away. I lay on that cot staring at the water-stained ceiling tiles and let myself cry for the first time that day. Not because I'd lost my family, because I'd finally escaped them. The next morning, I woke to the sound of someone moving around in the shop. I splashed water on my face in the bathroom, tried to make myself presentable, and emerged to find Henry already working on a car that had apparently been dropped off early. "Morning," he said without looking up. "Coffee's fresh. Help yourself." I poured a cup and stood awkwardly, unsure what came next. "You planning on sticking around?" Henry asked. "If you'll have me, I'm a good worker. I can prove it." "You proved it last night, but I got questions. Why'd you leave your father's shop? Why are you here instead of there?" I could have lied. Made up something about wanting independence, about seeking new opportunities. Instead, I told him the truth. All of it. The favoritism, the credit theft, Chad's harassment, the final confrontation. I laid it all out while he worked, and he listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Marcus Thorne is a fool, always has been. His father, now that, was a man who understood the work. But Marcus," he shook his head. "He inherited something good and spent 20 years running it into the ground. You knew my grandfather. Worked with him on a few projects back in the day. Good man, honest. He'd be ashamed of what Marcus has done with his legacy." Henry straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. "Here's what I'm offering. You can work here, help me out with the jobs that come in. I'll pay you $15 an hour, which I know ain't much. You can keep sleeping in the back until you save enough for a real place. I don't care that you're a girl. I care that you know your way around an engine. Deal." "Deal," I said immediately. "Good, now grab that floor jack and help me get this transmission out." Damn thing's been slipping, and I got a feeling we're going to find some ugly surprises inside. That's how my new life started. In a shop 1/10 the size of where I'd come from, working for 1/3 of what I should have been making sleeping on a cot in a closet office. And I'd never been happier. Henry Henderson was everything my father wasn't. He taught instead of criticized. He praised good work and corrected mistakes without making them personal. When I figured out a clever solution to a problem, he'd actually say, "Good thinking, Riley," instead of taking credit for it himself. The work was varied. We did everything from basic oil changes to complete engine rebuilds. Some days we had 3 cars waiting, some days we had none. The clientele was mostly working-class people who couldn't afford the dealership rates, people who needed their cars to get to work and couldn't waste money on unnecessary repairs. I learned the business side from Henry. How to estimate jobs fairly, how to source parts cheaply, how to communicate with customers in a way that built trust. He showed me his books, explained his profit margins, talked about the challenges of running a small shop in a world dominated by chains and dealerships. The secret, he told me one day, is that you gotta be better than them and cheaper than them. Better work, better customer service, and fair prices. Do that and people will find you. 3 weeks after I started at Henderson's, I met Elijah Barnes. Elijah was a mechanic who rented bay space from Henry, working on his own projects and clients. He was in his early 50s, quiet and intense, with the kind of scarred hands that told stories of decades working with machinery. He had a lean, hard look to him, like he'd been through things that had burned away anything soft. He didn't acknowledge me for the first few days. He'd come and work in his corner of the shop, leave. No small talk, no interest in the new help. I assumed he was just the silent type. Then one day I was working on a differential that had me stumped. The gears looked fine, but I could hear something wrong in the rotation. I'd torn it down twice and still couldn't find the problem. Elijah walked over, didn't say anything, just looked at what I was doing. Then he picked up a gear, held it up to the light at a specific angle. "There," he said, pointing to a hairline crack I'd missed. "Heat fracture. You can barely see it, but it'll cause noise and eventually fail completely." I looked at where he was pointing and felt stupid for missing it. "Thank you." He nodded and started to walk away. "You're good at this," I said. "Have you been doing it long?" He paused, seemed to debate whether to answer. 30 years, give or take." "Did you always work here?" "No." He looked at me for the first time, really looked at me. "Why do you care?" "Just making conversation." "Don't," he said. "I'm not here to make friends, I'm here to work." He went back to his bay, and that was the end of that. But over the following weeks, I noticed him watching me sometimes. Not in a creepy way, but with a kind of assessing look, like he was trying to figure something out. When I'd solve a problem efficiently, I'd catch him nodding slightly. When I'd mess something up, I'd feel his disapproval, even though he never said anything. One evening after Henry had left and I was closing up the shop, Elijah approached me. "You're Marcus Thorne's daughter," he said. Not a question. "Unfortunately," I replied. "Why unfortunately?" "Long story. I got time." So I told him, not as detailed as I'd told Henry, but enough. The favoritism, the credit theft, the final blow-up. He listened without expression, then nodded slowly. 23 years ago, he said. I owned a small manufacturing business. Custom parts, specialty orders, good clients. I was doing well. Then Marcus Thorne approached me about a partnership. Said he wanted to merge operations, combine resources. He had a lawyer draw up papers, everything looked legitimate, and I signed. He paused, and I could see old anger flickering in his eyes. 3 months later, I didn't have a business anymore. Marcus had used clauses in the contract I didn't understand to systematically freeze me out. He took my clients, my designs, my equipment, left me with nothing but debt and a legal mess I couldn't afford to fight. My stomach sank. I didn't know. Why would you were probably not even born yet. But I knew Marcus Thorne. I knew what kind of man he was. And when I heard his daughter was working here, I figured you were probably cut from the same cloth. And now, he looked at me steadily. Now I know you're not. Now I know you got thrown out for the same reason I did. You were too good, and that threatened him. I don't know about too good, I said. I'm learning every day how much I don't know. That's what makes you better than him, Elijah said. He thinks he knows everything. You know you've got more to learn. That's the difference between someone who'll stay where they are and someone who'll go somewhere. From that day on, Elijah became my second teacher. Where Henry taught me the practical side of mechanics and business, Elijah taught me the theoretical side. He knew metallurgy, engineering principles, advanced fabrication techniques. He'd been trained as an engineer before he became a machinist, and that combination of knowledge was rare. He was also calculating in a way Henry wasn't. Henry saw the good in people. Elijah saw the angles. "Your father's business is struggling," he told me one day 6 months after I'd left. "Word on the street is he's losing contracts, bleeding money." "How do you know?" "I make it my business to know, and I want you to know too. Because one day when he's desperate enough, there's going to be an opportunity." "Opportunity for what?" Elijah smiled, and it wasn't a particularly friendly expression. "For you to take back what should have been yours all along." The idea should have seemed impossible. I was barely surviving on minimum wage, sleeping on a cot, saving every penny I could. How was I supposed to compete with an established business? But Elijah started teaching me more than mechanics. He taught me about business structures, financing, market positioning. He introduced me to people he knew in the industry, people who could become clients or suppliers. He was building something, and slowly I realized he was building it with me at the center. "Why are you doing this?" I asked him one night. "Revenge," he said simply. "Marcus Thorne took something from me that I can never get back. Years of my life, my business, my sense of security. I want him to know what that feels like. And the best revenge isn't destroying him myself. It's watching his daughter do it." "I don't want revenge," I said. "I just want to build something good." "Then build something good," Elijah said. "But build it big enough that he can see it. Build it successful enough that he knows what he threw away. That's not revenge. That's justice." Over the next year, my life transformed. I moved out of the shop and into a tiny apartment, barely more than a studio. But it was mine. I worked 60-hour weeks, taking on every job I could, building a reputation. Word spread about the young woman at Henderson's who could diagnose problems other mechanics missed, who did quality work for fair prices. My client base grew. Michael Torres, the entrepreneur whose project Chad had tried to sabotage, found me at Henderson's and brought me more work. He told his colleagues about me. They brought their friends. Slowly, carefully, I was building something real. Henry started talking about retirement. His wife wanted to move to Florida. His joints hurt more every day. "This place could be yours, Riley," he told me. "You've more than earned it, but I know you don't have the money to buy it outright." That's when Elijah made his proposal. We were in his bay late at night working on a custom fabrication project together. He pulled out a folder of documents and set them in front of me. "I've been doing some research on your father's business," he said. "He's in worse shape than I thought. He's leveraged, everything maxed out credit lines, and still can't make payroll consistently. He's going to have to sell or go bankrupt within the year." I flipped through the documents, financial reports, credit histories, client loss analyses. Elijah had been thorough. "I have some money saved," Elijah continued. "Not a fortune, but enough. I want to invest it in you. We buy Henderson's shop together. We expand it. We build a real business. And when your father's business goes on the market, we buy that too." "Buy it? Why would I want to buy the place that treated me like garbage?" "Because it should have been yours," Elijah said intensely. "Your grandfather built that business. You're his legacy, not Marcus. You have more right to that place than anyone. Even if we could afford it, even if it was possible, why would you help me do this? What do you get out of it?" He was quiet for a long moment. I get to see Marcus Thorne's face when he realizes his throwaway daughter became more successful than he ever was. I get to see him understand that he destroyed his own legacy by not recognizing what he had. That's worth more to me than money. I looked at the documents, at the evidence of my father's failing business, and felt something complicated twist in my chest. Not triumph exactly, more like the satisfaction of mathematics working out correctly. He'd always said I couldn't make it without him. Here was evidence to the contrary. "Let me think about it," I said. But I already knew my answer. 6 weeks later, Elijah and I bought Henderson's Mechanics. Henry sold it to us for $60,000 money that Elijah provided with generous repayment terms. We changed the name to The Forge because I wanted to make it clear this was something new. Not Henderson's Mechanics, not Thorne Metalworks. Something built from raw materials and shaped by fire into something stronger. We renovated over the next 4 months. New paint, updated equipment, better lighting. We hired 2 additional mechanics, young guys who I trained personally. We specialized in precision work, custom fabrication, the kind of jobs that required skill and attention. Word spread. We started getting corporate clients, specialty manufacturers, vintage car collectors. Our reputation became a thing people talked about. The woman at the Forge who could solve problems no one else could touch. By the time I turned 21, the Forge was profitable. By 22, we'd expanded to a second location. By 23, I'd been interviewed by trade magazines, featured in local business journals, invited to speak at industry conferences. And through it all, I kept track of Thorn Metal Works. Not obsessively, but enough to know that the decline was accelerating. Clients leaving equipment, failing, workers quitting. Chad had apparently tried to implement some cost-cutting measures that backfired spectacularly, resulting in a lawsuit over defective parts. My father's reputation in the industry, once solid if unspectacular, was now mud. Then came the information I'd been waiting for. Thorn Metal Works was quietly shopping for investors looking for someone to buy a controlling stake. They were desperate, willing to accept almost any reasonable offer just to stay afloat. Elijah came to my office with the news, his smile predatory. It's time. We structured the deal carefully, created a shell investment company, made an offer that was just generous enough to be tempting without raising too many questions. We had a lawyer review everything multiple times to make sure it was airtight. My father took the deal, signed the papers, accepted the money, transferred 60% ownership of Thorn Metal Works to our shell company. He was probably relieved. Probably thought he'd managed to save his business, that things would get better now. He didn't know who owned the shell company until the day I walked into his office. I'd thought about that moment for years. Imagined different versions of it. Sometimes I was cold and professional. Sometimes I was angry and confrontational. Sometimes I just wanted to see the look on his face. The reality was stranger than any version I'd imagined. I felt nothing, or rather, I felt like I was watching it happen to someone else. I dressed professionally, a business suit that cost more than I used to make in a month. I walked into Thorn Metal Works, past the reception desk, straight to my father's office. The door was open, and he was hunched over paperwork, with my mother, both of them looking older and more worn than I remembered. They looked up when I entered, confusion, then recognition, then a complicated cascade of emotions I couldn't quite read. "Hello, Dad," I said. "Mom, it's been a while." My father stood up, his face coloring with anger. "What are you doing here? You're not welcome in this building." "Actually, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." I pulled out the contract, the beautiful, legally binding contract that made me majority shareholder. I placed it on his desk, right on top of whatever crisis he'd been working on. "I own this company now. Well, me and my partner, 60%. The investment company that bought you out, that was us." The silence that followed was exquisite. I watched my father pick up the contract, read it, read it again, looking for the trap. But there was no trap. It was completely legal, completely legitimate, completely done. "You can't," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I already did. The papers are filed. Your lawyers reviewed and approved the deal. Remember, congratulations, Dad. You just sold your company to your throwaway daughter." My mother stood so quickly, her chair tipped over. "This is some kind of fraud. We'll sue. You'll do nothing," I said calmly, "because there's nothing to do. This is legitimate, legal, binding. You needed money, I had money. It's called business." That's when Brenda and Chad arrived, summoned by someone, probably my mother. They pushed into the office, and I got my first good look at them in 3 years. Brenda had aged badly. She looked tired, hard lines around her mouth and eyes. Chad had gained weight and lost some hair. Success clearly hadn't agreed with either of them. "What is she doing here?" Brenda demanded. I turned to face them. "Hello, Brenda, Chad. I was just telling our parents the good news. I'm your new boss." Chad laughed, but it sounded forced. "That's impossible. There's no way you have that kind of money." "No, let me tell you what I've been doing for the past 3 years. I've been building a business from nothing. The Forge is now one of the most respected custom mechanics and fabrication shops in the region. Last year, we did $700,000 in revenue. This year, we're on track for over $1 million, and I used some of that money to buy this place." I watched the information sink in, the disbelief, the shock, the dawning fear. "Meanwhile," I continued, "this place has been dying. Revenue down 40% since I left. Lost contracts, lawsuits, workers quitting. You've been coasting on my grandfather's reputation while running everything he built into the ground." My father slammed his hand on the desk. "You don't know anything about running this business." "I know more than you do," I said. "I've been watching. I know about every contract you've lost, every mistake you've made, every corner you've cut. I've made it my business to know, and now it's literally my business." I pulled out a new wrench from my bag and set it on his desk. Brand new, gleaming, perfect. "This is my gift to you, a tool. You're going to need it because things are changing. I own 60% of this company now. That means I make the decisions, and I've decided we're going to restructure, modernize, actually meet quality standards. And you're going to work for me." "Never," my mother spat. "Then leave. Walk away right now, forfeit your shares, and I'll buy you out. 30 cents on the dollar, which is generous considering the current state of things. Or you stay, follow my lead, and maybe we can save this place. You vindictive bitch, Brenda said. I'm a businesswoman who just acquired an underperforming asset. There's a difference. Chad stepped forward, trying to intimidate me like he used to. You can't do this. We'll find a way to stop you. How? You can't afford lawyers. You can't afford anything. I have security measures in place, 3 years of reputation building behind me, and a legitimate legal contract. You're not going to stop me. You're going to accept this or walk away with nothing. The silence stretched. I could see the calculations happening behind their eyes. Here's my offer, I said. You all stay on, but things change. Dad, you're not running operations anymore. Sales, maybe, if you can handle it. Mom, you stay on bookkeeping with new systems and actual oversight. Brenda, will figure out what you can actually do. And Chad, I looked at him directly. You don't work here. You never really did. You're fired. Security will escort you out. The security guards I'd hired appeared on cue. Chad's face went purple. You can't fire me. I just did. In fact, I should thank you, Chad. You taught me valuable lessons about recognizing parasites and cutting dead weight. Consider this your final contribution to the company. They escorted him out, Brenda torn between, following him and staying with her meal ticket, eventually choosing to go with Chad. My parents remained standing in the office like they'd been struck by lightning. 3 years ago, I said quietly, you threw a wrench at my head. You told me to learn my place or get out. You chose cruelty over kindness. You chose Chad over your own daughter. You threw away the best worker you had because I wasn't what you wanted me to be. And you know what? Thank you. My father looked up. What? Thank you, because if you hadn't thrown me out, I never would have learned what I was capable of. I never would have built the forge. I never would have become who I am now. You wanted to break me, but you set me free. I walked to the door, then paused. You have until Monday to decide. Work with me under my terms or take the buyout and leave. Either way, this company is moving forward, with or without you. I left them there and walked out to where Elijah was waiting in the parking lot. How'd it go? He asked. Exactly as expected, I said. Then for the first time in 3 years, I let myself cry. Not sad tears, tears of completion of justice, of a chapter finally closing. 3 days later, my parents accepted my terms, not with grace, but with resignation. They understood they had no choice. I restructured Thorn Metalworks over the next 18 months. New management, updated equipment, actual quality controls. I merged it with the Forge, creating a company that could handle everything from small custom jobs to major industrial contracts. But here's the thing, nobody expected the part I'm most proud of. I didn't run my father into the ground. I didn't humiliate him or make his life miserable. I actually made him better at his job. Turns out my father was decent at sales when he wasn't responsible for the technical side, when he couldn't take credit for other people's work. He was personable with clients, good at networking, skilled at reading what people needed, even if he couldn't deliver it himself. So I let him do that. Just that. My mother's bookkeeping had always been competent, just not computerized or particularly efficient. I brought in modern accounting software, streamlined processes, and she actually adapted. She even grudgingly admitted once that the new systems worked better. Brenda, it turned out, had a talent for logistics and scheduling that had been buried under years of being spoiled. When I made her actually work, actually contribute, she rose to the challenge. Not enthusiastically, but effectively. The company thrived. 5 years after I bought it, the merged entity was worth $3 million. I'd paid off every investor, including Elijah, who I made a full partner because loyalty deserves reward. I bought a house with a garage where I could still work with my hands when I wanted to. I built a team that respected skill over gender quality, over connections. My father still works for me. We're not close. We'll probably never be close. But there's peace in the distance, a mutual respect that comes from clear boundaries and honest expectations. Brenda and Chad broke up after 2 years. He blamed her for his career failures. She resented him for being the reason she'd lost her family's favor. She's back in Pittsburgh now, working for me, actually doing real work. We're not friends, but we're not enemies either. We're colleagues with a complicated history. My mother has softened slightly with age. She'll never apologize, people like her don't. But she looks at me sometimes with what might be respect, or at least acknowledgement that she underestimated me. And me, I'm 28 now. I've got a company worth more than I ever dreamed possible. I've got a team that would walk through fire for me. I've got respect in an industry that didn't want to give it to me. The girl who got a wrench thrown at her head doesn't exist anymore. She died in that shop, and someone stronger took her place. Someone who knows that family isn't about blood, it's about respect. Someone who understands that the best revenge isn't destruction, it's success. Someone who learned that the sound of a wrench hitting a wall can either break you or wake you up, and I chose to wake up. Sometimes late at night when I'm alone in my office, I think about that moment. The wrench flying past my head, my father's rage, the sneering faces of people who were supposed to love me. And I think about how that was the best thing that ever happened to me because it forced me to become who I was always meant to be. Not the obedient daughter, not the silent victim, but the blacksmith, the forge master, the woman who takes broken things and makes them whole again, starting with herself. So here's my question for you. Have you ever been thrown away by people who should have valued you? Have you ever been told you're worthless by people who couldn't see your worth? And if so, what did you do about it? Did you stay and accept their version of your story? Or did you walk away and write your own? Drop your answer in the comments. Hit that like button if this story resonated with you. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about people who refuse to stay victims. Because the world is full of people waiting for permission to be strong, and sometimes all it takes is hearing one story about someone who decided enough was enough. Remember, you don't need anyone's permission to value yourself. You don't need anyone's approval to build the life you deserve. Sometimes the best thing someone can do for you is throw you out because it forces you to stand on your own 2 feet and realize you've been strong enough all along. And if you're in that dark place right now, if you're dealing with people who don't see your worth, I want you to know something. You're not alone. You're not crazy. You're not overreacting. Trust your gut. Trust your value. And when you're ready, walk away from anyone who makes you feel small and build something that makes you feel mighty. The forge is always ready. The hammer is always waiting. And the steel of your future self is just waiting to be shaped. All you have to do is strike.